As Janice trudged home from work, she braved the frigid weather. The biting wind seemed to invigorate her, even though everything in her life felt like it was falling apart. Nothing seemed to be going right, and she felt like she was constantly in the dark, with someone scheming against her. She couldn't even pinpoint who it might be. Just as she was feeling defeated, a colleague pulled up beside her and offered her a ride. Janice gratefully accepted. The freezing temperatures made the journey ahead seem insurmountable. "Thank you so much. I was starting to think I might freeze to death before getting home. It's unbelievably cold today, especially considering winter is supposed to be over," Janice exclaimed. "I know, right? They even issued a storm warning because of the wet snow. That's probably why the boss let us go an hour early, so we could get home safely. It feels like we're stuck in winter, like spring might never come," said her colleague with a hint of melancholy. Janice empathized with her colleague's sentiments all too well. They were both stuck in unhappy marriages, fully aware that their current situations were only temporary. They simply had to endure their husbands until the day they could finally break free. Without saying a word, they both understood each other's predicaments. But what was keeping them from taking action? Society's harsh condemnation. Janice feared the scandal that would arise if she left her husband, while her colleague knew that she would have nowhere to live if she were to split up with hers, and so they both remained silent about their true feelings. As the car came to a stop in front of Janice's house, she expressed her gratitude to her friend once more. "One day, we'll be free of all this," her friend said with a wistful smile. "I really hope so," Janice replied with a heavy heart. She stepped out of the car and was immediately hit by the biting cold wind. With her hands covering her face, she hurriedly made her way towards the entranceway, navigating the increasingly slippery asphalt. As soon as she reached the entryway and stepped inside, things got a little easier. She ascended to her apartment, shedding her outer clothes and hanging them on the radiator before heading straight to the bathroom. She filled the tub with hot water and sank into it, finally feeling the warmth she had been yearning for since leaving the office. As she relaxed in the water, she couldn't help but feel a sense of turmoil stirring within her. How had she gone so wrong? Why did she marry her husband in the first place? She couldn't figure out where she went wrong and why she married the man in the first place. She had money, a good inheritance. Why did she get married? It was as if she had it in her head that she had to be a wife. It was okay if her husband had been a decent partner, but he was a complete leech. He expected her to do all the household chores, cook, clean, work, look presentable, and never ask anything from him in return. His list of demands was endless. At first, she had tried to keep up with his expectations, but it soon became tedious. Now, as she lay in the tub, thoughts of cooking dinner entered her mind, but she simply closed her eyes instead. Her entire life seemed to be falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her head ached, and the soothing scent of roses and lavender from her shower gel did little to ease her mind. It was as if her problems were multiplying, and the scent was only a temporary distraction. If only her life were as simple as that. She went to the kitchen and started cooking dinner. Now everything was back to how it used to be. She turned on the TV and occasionally got distracted by the shows. Did she really want this kind of life? Was this her dream? What terrible thing happened in her life that made her decide to get married? She had no answers to these questions, as if the woman she was before marriage was completely different. She was scared to realize what awaited her in the future if she didn't change anything. "What's that burning smell?" her husband asked as he walked into the kitchen. He had just come in from outside and was still wearing his hat, which was covered in snow. "Will you ever learn how to cook?" he added. She didn't answer him. She knew she was a great cook, but he always found a reason to belittle her, to laugh at her, or to insult her. It seemed like he didn't care about anything else. He just wanted to torment her, apparently deriving pleasure from it. He sat down at the table, and she placed the food in front of him. He enjoyed it all and then made a face of disgust. "Listen, I've been thinking, maybe you could give me a share of the apartment," he asked. "We live together, but I don't understand why I'm still not registered here. Seriously, you could leave me with nothing, or even worse, you might decide to divorce me and I won't get anything. Actually, it's the man's responsibility to provide housing for his woman. Why should I give you a share in an apartment that you didn't help purchase?" she asked calmly, sitting next to him. He didn't say anything, but it was clear how much he had become angry, and she felt that his anger would soon overflow. She didn't want to irritate him, but she also wasn't going to give him a share of the apartment. She inherited this apartment, she decorated it with her own money, and even if something broke here, she called a repairman and paid for it herself. So he had no right to demand any share here. Apparently, he understood that, and now he was fidgeting like a fish on a frying pan for some reason. She didn't understand why he had been talking more about divorce lately, but suddenly she felt so good when she imagined that the divorce could happen. That evening, he didn't speak to her anymore. He was sulking, tilting his head back demonstratively, staying silent, fiddling with his phone, and intentionally watching movies that she didn't like. She felt pressured by him, but today it was no longer as important to her. She felt like she was losing her dependence on him and realized that in a few months, when she could let go of her attachment to him, she could file for divorce herself. Yes, people would constantly judge her and tell her that at her age, she should have been married long ago, but she was no longer afraid of that. Let them talk, let them gossip behind her back, but that was no longer her concern. When he fell asleep sitting on the couch, clumsily slumped on a pillow, she couldn't even bear to look at him. She went to the kitchen and only then noticed that he had left his phone here. Automatically, she picked it up and suddenly saw that he was having an affair. When she realized that he was cheating on her, she felt even more disgusted by his presence in her apartment and wanted to kick him out right now. But she wouldn't do that. She would wait for the right moment when all her feelings had passed, and then she would kick him out without any hope of return. Then she could resist his manipulation when he came with flowers and begged her to come back. The next day, while at work, Janice couldn't stop thinking about her husband cheating on her. She didn't know how to handle the situation, and she didn't know how to tell her colleague and friend. During their lunch break at the mall food court, Janice felt pressure from her friend, who could tell something was bothering her. When Janice turned her head, she was stunned to see her husband's mistress hugging some guy right in front of her. Janice immediately understood that they were both in long-term relationships, but decided to have a little fun on the side. What surprised her the most was that they ran into each other in this huge city at that specific location. Janice went home and was so upset and shattered that she almost immediately fell asleep. The next time she woke up, she was in shock. She felt a chilling sensation running through her body. When she opened her eyes, all she could see was white fabric. It was cold and quiet, and she could hear the sound of refrigerators humming. She realized she was in a morgue. She was so scared that she wanted to scream, but she was frozen. Someone entered the morgue, and their conversation echoed throughout the room. Janice was stunned when she heard her husband's words. She never expected him to say what he just did. "I've already paid for everything. Stop going over it again and again," he exclaimed. "I said just cremate her quickly before she wakes up, and that's it. I think I've paid for everything already. Why start all this again? You said you'd take care of everything without any questions." "But you didn't say she would be alive," retorted another person. Janice was in shock at her husband's words. They were talking about something that horrified her. They wanted to cremate her while she was still alive. She needed to get up, grab a scalpel or something to defend herself, and escape from there. But she couldn't move out of fear. She was paralyzed, her legs trembling, her hands pinned to the gurney's cold surface. The best option was to pretend to be dead. She was so scared that she couldn't even feel her own heart beating. What difference does it make? She won't wake up, she'll burn, and that's it. I need to get all this done today, or I won't have time for all these documents. God, is it really so hard to do all this? Alex was so angry that his voice changed tone immediately. Janice, who had lived with him for so many years, could easily tell how angry he was. Then leave. I won't light the stove while you're here. I told you to bring it by 9 and throw it in the furnace, but you brought it 2 hours later. This is not a microwave. It will be immediately noticeable that someone lit it. Smoke will come out. Did you even think about that? You messed up, and it's my fault? I injected her with the drug. She'll sleep until morning, and in the morning, we'll have a new batch to lay down with her. Another voice spoke. Okay, let it be. I'll come for the ashes tomorrow. Scatter them somewhere in the river so no one ever finds them. Then I'll make the next payment tomorrow, he said, then turned abruptly and left. The iron door closed immediately. Janice felt how she was still shaking. When the doctor approached her, he immediately realized that she had already woken up. She couldn't say anything to him, as if all the words were stuck in her throat. She couldn't speak or do anything. Would they really put her in the furnace? Had she weakened so much from fear that she wouldn't be able to resist? Do you hear me? If you do, nod your head, the doctor said. And she nodded, the white sheet that covered her forming an unattractive crease. Listen to me carefully. I have to roll you out now, lead you down the corridor. There are several huge windows in the corridor. I'll give you a command. Hold your breath. It's very important now. Your husband must see that you are dead. Do you understand? Then I'll turn down the corridor, and we'll get to the street. There's not much time to talk now, the doctor said. He changed the sheet. On the old one, there was already saliva, because Janice was terribly worried when the doctor spoke. She suddenly felt somewhat safe. Don't worry, no one will light the stove. I'll help you get out. Someone is already waiting for you. She looked at him, not understanding why he was helping her, but couldn't ask anything now. When he rolled her out and began giving her commands, and she held her breath, they turned and he told her she could breathe easily now. When she felt the cold become much more intense, she felt sick. She leaned over the edge of the stretcher, her nerves getting the better of her, and immediately leaned back. He helped her up, gave her some medication, and she looked closely at what he handed her. He poisoned you badly. You'll feel bad for a long time. Take 2 tablets in the morning and in the evening. That's all. Goodbye, the doctor said. Wait, we'll stop at the gas station, grab some food, and you'll move to the front seat. What, are you going to strangle me? Fiona laughed. When they stopped at the gas station, Janice felt a pleasant sensation that everything would be okay. Janice felt like her life was changing dramatically, and she had a persistent feeling that she had only survived by chance. She still didn't understand how her husband, despite how he treated her, wanted to cremate her alive. How did you get involved in all of this? Janice asked, surprised. We'll have time to chat later. Here, buy some jelly sweets, chips, I don't know. We have a long way to go, and I need to check the car, Fiona said. Janice did everything she was told. When she returned to the car, she felt safe again. She didn't understand where this feeling came from. If her husband wanted to cremate her alive, he could have reached her from anywhere. On the contrary, she should have been afraid of every shadow, but that feeling wasn't there now. They got back into the car, and when the car started moving, the feeling of safety only intensified. Janice looked around. She didn't recognize the area around the road. There were dry fields, black soil, and small plantations. She couldn't understand where they were specifically and felt like she was going to fall out of reality. She continued to take the pills given to her by the doctor. Her condition gradually improved. As it happened, I just ended up being a victim in this story, Fiona said. I came from abroad because I had problems with my documents. I realized that I couldn't be in the kind of relationship I had, so I decided to return home for good. I wanted to find you because I missed you terribly. But when I drove to your house, I saw your husband putting some girl in his car. I immediately realized that something was wrong. The friend slowed down, and a police officer stopped her and checked her documents. When Janice took out her documents, she was stunned to see a completely different surname and patronymic. She still couldn't understand what was going on. Fortunately, her first name remained. When Diana returned to the car, Janice looked at her suspiciously, but she didn't interrupt her. She wanted to hear the whole story from beginning to end, no matter how difficult it was. Have you seen the documents yet? So from now on, I'm no longer Fiona. I'm Christy Campbell, so call me that only. Anyway, when I followed your husband, Janice was amazed. So they wanted to burn us alive just to get their hands on the apartments? She asked incredulously. I was in shock myself, replied Christy. I couldn't believe it happened right before my eyes. I followed your husband and found out which specific doctor he had made a deal with. Then I took care of everything. I warned that woman about your husband. I paid the doctor extra, and I had new documents made for us. I could have kept the old ones, but then he could find you. There was silence in the car. The expensive vehicle crept along the road, trailing behind other cars. There was probably an accident or some roadworks ahead, causing slow traffic that made Janice feel uneasy. She felt her body shaking. Don't worry. These documents are just a precaution. Think of it as a fresh start for us. Remember when we used to dream of living together? Well, now we'll live together like sisters. We'll have our own sisterhood, said Christy, smiling. I'm also glad I finally got rid of that horrible name. Everything will be okay, don't worry. Christy placed her hand on Janice's knee, and she immediately stopped shaking. Janice didn't know how to thank her friend, and she started crying. She felt like she had miraculously escaped some terrible fate, and it was unnerving to think that she could have died this morning. She could have been put into the furnace alive, all for what? Just so her husband could finally get his hands on that big apartment in the city, along with his mistress. We have a home now. We have somewhere to live. I'll teach you how to work online, and we'll have a good life together. You can trust me, Christy continued. And I have a whole heap of dirt on your husband. If he does show up, I'll just hand him over to the police with all the evidence. You don't have to worry anymore. It's all finally over. Janice finally breathed a sigh of relief. Christy had never lied to her before, and if she said everything was okay, then it was. She could relax now and look forward to her new life. Nothing else mattered. She just wanted to get as far away from the city where she had been so unhappy. She would have a new home, a new job, a new life, and she would be forever grateful to her beloved friend, with whom she had lost contact because of her husband. They really did feel like they had become sisters again. As the road finally came to an end, they turned into a beautiful cottage settlement. Janice stood up, trying to stretch her neck as much as possible. They parked the car next to a lovely cottage, and Christy pulled into the driveway. The surroundings were breathtakingly beautiful, with the sea just a few hundred meters away. It wasn't frozen, but rather a beautiful, chilly expanse. Is this really our home? Janice asked in amazement, looking out at the sea from the balcony. Yes, my love, we will live here now, said Christy, pleased to see that her friend liked it. It was scary to think about what Janice had been through. Alex paced around the apartment, not knowing what to do. He was shaking so much that he couldn't even focus. He had spent too much time and money consulting with lawyers, but he still couldn't inherit the apartment. It annoyed him that the apartment he so badly wanted was now sealed. He couldn't just get it, he couldn't even live there. I knew you wouldn't be able to do it. I knew you were weak, Marilyn Evans said, crossing her arms over her chest. Just shut up. You couldn't even keep your own man. He just left you with nothing, he yelled rudely at his lover. It was your responsibility. You promised me that you would do everything perfectly. Don't shift the blame onto me. You took on this sin, but what's the point? It's just idiocy. I knew I shouldn't have gotten involved with you in the first place, she screamed. He knew that when she was in this mood, calming her down was impossible. He was even angrier because he had no control over the situation. He said calmly, "I have a headache from you already. Your constant shouting makes me feel sick." She just rolled her eyes and went into the kitchen. He'd heard her turn on the kettle and open the coffee jar. He thought his plan was perfect and that he would be able to execute it easily, but he couldn't do anything about it. At that very moment, his lover was standing in the kitchen, making coffee and wondering whether she should tell him that she was pregnant, but not by him. She was 100% sure that the baby was not his because the timing didn't add up. She was pregnant by another lover, but she wasn't sure if she could be happy with him. Now she didn't even know which of the two men she should choose. She was foolish. Could she have made such a mistake? He said to her, "Listen, can you lend me some money?" She snorted. He realized he wouldn't get any money from her. "Why should I lend you money? I should be grateful to my ex-husband for at least leaving me with a bank account. Of course, it won't last me for 10 years, but at least it will get me through for a while. You're a man. You should earn your own money. Look how smart you are," she said, took a sip, and closed her eyes. He knew that their relationship was falling apart, and it was all for this girl that he killed his own wife. He ordered her cremation to obtain the apartment so that they could live happily together. Now, it turned out that it was all for nothing. Moreover, he realized that even when he was mocking his wife, he was much happier with her. Alex understood that he had missed out on everything in his life, and it was painful for him to think that he was left without an apartment, without money, and without a job. "I knew you were a wimp," she repeated. Nowadays, real men are a rare find. Most of them are just mama's boys who expect a woman to do everything for them. Women should be homemakers while men till the soil, earn money, and provide for the family. She mimicked her mother's voice. "Enough, shut up," he said, grabbing his jacket and getting into the car. He left behind the apartment, the multi-story building, and just drove to his friend's place. It seemed like everything around him disappeared. He was on the verge of throwing up from nerves. He knew it was all over, that he had missed his chance. How could such a perfect plan fail? How could he not get the apartment after his ex-wife's absence for such a long time? When he arrived at his friend's place, he realized that his friend wasn't home. He had no choice but to return home. He felt sick to his stomach. "Let's go to the beach? We'll take our car and stay in a small hotel, relax," he said. She nodded. "I feel like everything is falling apart, but I don't want to do anything about it. Let's just go, relax, and swim. Everything is so tiring. I don't even know which thoughts are rational and which are just exhaustion," she agreed. Just a few days later, they were on their way to the beach. They talked a lot on the road, discussing how they could change their lives and how they could live without each other. He knew that this conversation wouldn't lead to anything good, but he still didn't want to talk about anything else. "Maybe we could come up with something after all. Let's sell the car and you can start a business," I said. "I'm not at that age, and I don't have the looks to settle for less, you know. I want to live well. I want to live off a man. I want to be married. Do you understand me?" She said, "I don't want to work hard my whole life. If there's a man who's supposed to do that, I'll clean, cook, and fulfill all his whims, but I'll be provided for, you know." He understood her, but he didn't want to talk about it. They stopped by a small hotel, checked in, and almost immediately went to the beach. On the same day, they had their first major argument in their new place. Angry, he just drove off, pulled up at the mall, left the car because he just wanted to grab a bite here. He went up to the 3rd floor, but suddenly froze. With his own eyes, he saw his ex-wife, whom they were cremating. He held her ashes in his hands, and he saw her beautiful young face being carried towards the furnace. Looking at her now, he felt like everything inside him was turning upside down. "Janice," he screamed. She turned to him, but pretended not to recognize him at all. She was talking to some man, and now he noticed him too. He pointed at him with his finger, but Janice shook her head in denial. He approached her, grabbed her hand, but she immediately pulled her palm away. She looked at him as if she didn't know him at all. She didn't look like Janice, she was Janice. He fell to his knees in fear, in horror that had engulfed him. "Oh my God, Janice, forgive me." "Janice, how is this possible?" he exclaimed. Everyone around them started looking at them. "They don't call me Janice. You've got something mixed up," the woman said. She stepped away from him, and immediately a security guard, who apparently also realized that something was wrong, approached them. But by that time, Alex had already lost it. He screamed, lunged at her, but was quickly restrained. He was escorted out of the shopping center, and the police arrived. When they took him into custody, he just thought that they wouldn't let him go. He was indeed questioned, but ultimately released after a drug test. When he got out, he immediately went to the hotel, and when he told his lover about everything, she burst out laughing. "You're a fool? My goodness, you got involved with an idiot," Marilyn said, continuing to laugh. "I thought it was time to break up with you, and now it seems like you're also crazy." "Idiot, use your head. If she were alive, she would have been found long ago. The police would have found her, and the trials would have begun. Don't you understand?" He froze. There was meaning in his lover's words, but he stopped feeling the ground beneath his feet. He could see Janice with his own eyes. He saw her crazy green eyes and dark chestnut hair. He saw her freckles on her nose. It was all as if from his past. He became scared of realizing that he let her go after that situation. Everything around him became worse. His relationship with his lover deteriorated. He noticed that she was hiding her phone, that she was talking to someone, that everything was getting out of control. But what hurt him much more was that he wanted to find Janice. He was shaken by the thought that he had committed a crime, and she was still alive. On the very day they were supposed to leave the hotel, he wanted to go back to the same shopping center. He searched every inch of it, but never found her, and it was foolish to hope that he would see her again. She would undoubtedly hide, and he would never be able to find her. However, every time he mentioned seeing Janice, his mistress would dismiss it as his sick and inflamed imagination. But he didn't listen. He was sure he had seen Janice. And now, as he sat in his car, everything around him seemed to shut off. He reached into the glove compartment for his documents and suddenly saw a thick envelope. "You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong again. Leave us alone. If you try to find Janice again or even mention her name, I will crush you to dust. I am attaching copies of evidence, and believe me, this is only a small portion. If you decide to barge into her life and ruin everything, I will report it to the police, and you will rot in jail. With love, your guardian angel." The note was at least strange, but when he opened the package inside, he went crazy. Fingerprints, evidence that he had bought poison, even a recording of his conversation with the doctor. He was so scared that all of it would surface that he burned it all. Now, as he rode home with his mistress, he was afraid to even talk to her about it. He even feared that someone had broken into his car without his knowledge, but he didn't know for sure. "I've been thinking, you're right. Maybe it's all in my head, and I'm just paranoid that some evidence will surface and I'll end up in jail. That's why I've been so jumpy. Let's do what you suggested, sell the car, and start my own business. You're already pregnant, and we're going to have a child, so we need to get our act together," he said. "I'm glad you listened to me. It's been 2 years already. Trust me, if there were any evidence, it would have come to light by now. So there's no need to worry," she replied. On the way home, they talked sweetly, and he felt like she had forgiven him. He felt relieved. He didn't love her, nor did he want to be with her, but he didn't want to be alone either. Moreover, when she gave birth to their child, she would be tied to him, and there would be no escape for her, no matter how he treated her. From the moment he returned home, life became strange. He became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder. Of course, all the words he had spoken in the car were lies. He didn't sell the car or start a business. He spent his days lying on the couch, doing nothing, claiming that he was thinking about how to start a business. Apparently, she grew tired of waiting for him to take action. She came home and rang the doorbell. When he opened the door, he saw another man standing behind her. At first, he didn't understand what was happening, but gradually it dawned on him. He became so angry that his brain seemed to shut off, and he wanted to attack the man. But when he realized that the man was too strong for him, he backed down. "I'm not pregnant with your child. I forged the documents to make the dates match up. Here are the real hospital documents with the stamp, so I'm not pregnant with your child. I just wanted to give our relationship a chance, but I don't want to live in poverty with someone who can't even get off the couch. So I'm just going to pack my things and leave," she said calmly and without extra words, gathering her things and walking out. He couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't stop her, he couldn't even talk, and he couldn't resist the burly man who came with her. It made him angry, but he couldn't let his anger out. It was all over. He had lost absolutely everything. He had neither a wife nor a mistress, no money, no job. He fell to his knees in the apartment he rented with his mistress and cried. Meanwhile, Janice was standing in the kitchen, laughing. She and Christy were making a big apple pie. They chatted and laughed, reminiscing about some situations from their past. So much time had passed since her husband nearly burned her alive, and Janice had completely calmed down. Therefore, when she saw him, she could calmly resist him. She knew that Christy would provide evidence to make him back off. Believe me, but in this life, everything always comes back like a boomerang. Sometimes it seems like things aren't right, like there's no justice in this life, but believe me, justice kicks in exactly when it's needed. That's why it's no surprise that he lost absolutely everything, Christy said when the conversation turned to her ex-husband. Janice agreed with a nod as she listened to Christy's words. "You know, sometimes I think that everything in life happens for the better. No matter how scared I was back then, in the morgue, or how difficult my relationships were, now I'm truly happy. It's scary to think about how bad things could have been. I used to think that my life would be an endless nightmare, but everything changed. And now, living with you in this beautiful home by the sea, I'm just incredibly grateful to you," she said with a smile. "I actually bought this house long before I returned. I was already thinking about taking you out of your unhappy marriage and us living together. And it turned out that this house became not just a refuge for us, but also our fortress. That's why we're friends. That's why we're sisters." Christy beamed. Janice felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. She woke up every morning with joy, worked for her own pleasure, went to the sea, and just spent time with her dear friend. Her entire life had become a continuous stream of happiness. If someone had told her just a few years ago that she would be living a happy life, she would have never believed it. But it all happened just that way, and she was genuinely happy. Everything else was irrelevant. She had freed herself from the burden of those heavy relationships and avoided a dreadful fate. But most importantly, she had finally learned to love herself and the life that surrounded her.